A 1-year-old desert kingdom sold the rights to the largest oil reserves on Earth for less than the price of a house. And the buyer wasn't even sure there was oil down there. 90 years later, that same buyer's currency backs almost every barrel of oil traded on the planet. Its former oil company became the most profitable corporation in human history. And the kingdom that once needed a loan just to survive the Great Depression now owns trillion-dollar cities being built from scratch in the sand. How does a broke king, a struggling oil company, and a single piece of paper signed in 1933 end up rewriting the balance of global power for the next 100 years? Stick around, because the real story isn't the one you've heard on the internet. Start in 1932. King Abdulaziz Ibn Saud had just finished 30 years of war to unify Arabia into a single kingdom. He named it after his own family, but a kingdom needs money, and his had almost none, just a thin trickle of income from pilgrims visiting Mecca. Then the Great Depression gutted global travel, pilgrim numbers collapsed, and the royal treasury started running on fumes. Meanwhile, American oil companies were terrified of a different problem. World War I had proven that wars are won on oil, and Washington feared its own reserves wouldn't be enough for the next one. Worse, in 1920, Britain and France had carved up the old Ottoman oil fields between themselves and locked American firms out entirely. Washington fought back with an open-door policy, demanding equal access, really just economic warfare dressed up as principle. Then in 1932, a subsidiary of Standard Oil of California struck oil on the tiny island of Bahrain, right next to the Arabian coast. One question followed immediately. If there's oil under Bahrain, what's under the much bigger landmass right beside it? On paper, Britain should have won this concession easily. British companies already ran the oil business in Iraq and Persia. British officers had cultivated Gulf rulers for generations. But Ibn Saud had spent years watching Britain redraw the Middle East to suit London, not Arabia. And when the British finally bid for the Saudi concession, their terms were arrogant, not generous. They assumed they already had the region locked up. An American company, by contrast, came with no colonial baggage, no troops, no governor, just a business proposition. And one almost forgotten figure tipped the scales. Harry St. John Philby, a British ex-officer turned advisor inside the Saudi court, who was quietly also on Standard Oil's payroll. At the most fragile moment of the talks, when the American lawyer was ready to walk, Philby kept the deal alive. On May 29, 1933, in Jeddah, the agreement was signed, in exchange for a modest payment partly in gold. Because nobody trusted paper currency to survive the trip, Standard Oil got exclusive rights to drill across nearly 1 million square kilometers of eastern Saudi Arabia for 60 years. It was a brutally lopsided deal, but for a king with an empty treasury, a small share of something beat all of nothing. Then came 4 years of nothing but dry wells. By 1936, the company was nervous enough to sell half the concession just to spread the risk. And then, in March 1938, a well called Dammam No. 7 finally struck oil, real oil, flowing at over 1,000 barrels a day. They nicknamed it the Prosperity Well. It sat at the edge of what turned out to be the largest oil reserves ever discovered on Earth. But here's the part most retellings skip. The original contract wasn't just a business deal. It handed operational control of the kingdom's most valuable asset to American executives in San Francisco. Saudi Arabia was, in effect, a landlord collecting rent on its own resource. World War II changed the stakes entirely. German submarines prowled the Gulf. Roosevelt made Saudi Arabia, a country not even fighting the war, eligible for American lease aid. His own Interior Secretary proposed the U.S. government take direct control of the oil, treating it as a strategic national asset rather than a private company's business. That plan didn't happen, but it revealed exactly how Washington saw it. Not Saudi oil, but America's oil that happened to sit under Saudi sand. A contract alone couldn't protect a kingdom in a dangerous region, though. For that, the king needed the President of the United States, face to face. On February 14, 1945, aboard the USS Quincy in the Suez Canal, Roosevelt met Ibn Saud in person, the first meeting ever between a sitting American president and a Saudi king. Roosevelt was dying, barely 2 months from the end. Ibn Saud had never left Arabia in his life. They argued for hours over Palestine and never agreed. But underneath that disagreement, an unwritten understanding took shape. American protection for the kingdom in exchange for guaranteed American access to its oil. No signature, no treaty, just an impression both men carried home, and one that outlived Roosevelt himself by decades. By 1950, the relationship had a new problem. Venezuela had negotiated a 50-50 profit split with its oil partners, and Ibn Saud wanted to know why he was getting less. He threatened to nationalize the company outright, a threat Washington took deadly seriously after watching Iran nationalize its own oil industry, only for the CIA to quietly help overthrow the government responsible. So instead of a confrontation, the Truman administration engineered something sneakier. Aramco's 50% profit share to Saudi Arabia was restructured as a tax instead of a royalty, which meant the American companies could claim it right back as a credit on their U.S. tax bill. American taxpayers, without knowing it, were quietly footing the bill to keep a foreign king happy. It became known, once exposed, as the golden gimmick, and it worked. No nationalization, no disruption, just decades more of American-run oil. The real earthquake came in October 1973, when the U.S. rushed weapons to Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Arab OPEC members, led by Saudi Arabia, cut off oil to America entirely. Prices quadrupled in months, gas lines wrapped around city blocks, and for the first time, the world understood that the real power over oil had shifted from Houston boardrooms to Gulf palaces. Saudi Arabia moved fast. 25% ownership of Aramco in 1973, 60% in 1974, full ownership by 1980. On paper, the American era was over, except at almost that exact moment, in June 1974, Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh and quietly built something that kept the two economies bound together anyway. You've probably heard the popular version that Saudi Arabia secretly agreed to price all its oil exclusively in dollars forever. That part is mostly myth. Oil was already priced in dollars, and Saudi Arabia kept accepting British pounds for years afterward. What actually happened, revealed only in 2016 through a Freedom of Information request, was narrower but still huge. Saudi Arabia agreed to pour billions into U.S. Treasury bonds in exchange for American weapons. Oil money flowed into American markets. American arms flowed into Saudi arsenals. And the dollar's grip on global energy trade only tightened. So who actually won? On paper, Saudi Arabia. It owns its oil outright now, sets its own production, negotiates from strength. But look closer, and the old architecture never disappeared. It just changed shape. Saudi Arabia still depends on American security guarantees. Its military still runs on American weapons. And Washington still treats stability in Saudi oil markets as a matter of national interest. That dependency nearly broke in September 2019, when drones knocked out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production in a single strike, the largest disruption to global oil supply in modern history. Weeks later, Aramco went public anyway, raising $25 billion in the largest IPO ever. And today, It posts more annual profit than any company that has ever existed. Go back to that first 1933 payment, delivered partly in gold because nobody trusted paper money to hold its value. 90 years later, the currency behind that same relationship became the one the entire world trusts to price its energy. This was never really a story about oil in the sand. It's a story about how two desperate, unequal parties built a bond so deep, it still shapes how the planet pays for power literally. The concession expired decades ago. The alliance never did. If this one surprised you, subscribe to History Decoded. There's a lot more buried under that sand than oil.